What is up, hockey fans? Welcome to the Wraparound presented by Sticks.com. I am your host, Emma Lingen of the Hockey News. I'm joined, of course, by my wonderful co-host, Mike Agello, also of the Hockey News. And we've got tons to talk about today in all of our bite-sized storylines from around the NHL. Before we do, though, do want to remind you all that we are brought to you by Sticks.com. Why break the bank on sticks when you can get pro-level composite sticks without the pro price tag at Sticks.com? That's Stix.com. Head over now and gear up. All right, we are just going to dive right into it today, Mike, because we have so much to talk about, not the least of which being the Stanley Cup final. No, this is not a repeat episode from last year. It is a rematch of last year's Cup final matchup between the Florida Panthers and the Edmonton Oilers. But interesting, looking at both of these teams coming into this series now, looks a little bit different maybe than last year, even though it is the same two teams. The Panthers, of course, playing in their third straight Cup final, despite the fact that they entered the playoffs with multiple injuries down the stretch toward the end of the season. They entered the playoffs as the third seed in the Atlantic Division. Then you look at the Oilers as well, also the third seed in the Pacific. And so a lot of question marks around them, as we have talked about plenty on the show, whether it's defense or goaltending, plenty of question marks around the Oilers. But again, at the end of the day, did any of it matter? No, because both of the teams are still back in the Stanley Cup final where they were last year. Edmonton looking for revenge on the Panthers this year. So just kind of want to get your thoughts, Mike, on what do you think of these two teams and how their regular seasons respectively ended? Does it just kind of go to show that regular season finishes are just not all they're cracked up to be, or was this kind of a fluke that both of these teams ended up where they are?
I think it's proof that home ice advantage is meaningless because both of these teams did not have it and succeeded in spite of it. Now you could say, well, they're they made the Stanley Cup final last year and they know what it takes. The cores of these teams are the same, but there are a lot of different pieces. We've documented that, Florida lost a lot of players from that Stanley Cup winning team, but, Bill Zito deserves a lot of credit filling in the holes that he could, adding in guys like Nate Schmidt as free agents, AJ Greer, and, just pieces. And then at the deadline, because of the ability to use LTIR and Matthew Tkachuk being injured at the Four Nations, he was able to get Brad Marchand and Seth Jones. And I think that solidified both them up front and on the blue line. And for Edmonton, it was a lot of little moves. Jake Wallman at the deadline, picking up Kasperi Kapanen on waivers, just a lot of little moves. Some of them were successful. Some of them, Stan Bowman inherited, like the contract of Victor Arvidsson and the contract of Jeff Skinner, both of whom really haven't been a factor in the playoffs. But they've succeeded in spite of some of the moves that they did make and getting players that have stepped up that were unexpected. With Florida, that third line, the Lusterrain and Lundell and Marchand line has been a difference maker for them. And with Edmonton, their bottom six has really produced the Adam Henriques, the Connor Browns. They've been able to get players to contribute that outside of McDavid and Draisaitl, and that's why both of these teams are here right now.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the bottom six for the Oilers. That's obviously going to be of the utmost importance here, is their forward depth heading into this Cup final, because they will be playing the entire series without Zach Hyman. Of course, he underwent surgery last week for an upper body injury after he had to exit the game versus Dallas. He's leading the playoffs in hits right now. He's got 111. He's fifth on the Oilers in playoff points. So that's obviously a significant loss for Edmonton here heading into this final. But, you mentioned the bottom six, the guys who have stepped up, guys like Adam Henrique and AJ Greer, or that AJ Greer's with Florida, but so same kind of principle applies here, I think. Is there anyone in in Edmonton in particular who you're looking at who really needs to step up in the absence of Zach Hyman?
Well, two players seem to be, I think, projected to fill that spot. One, I don't think can, because I don't think Corey Perry can handle the minutes that Zach Hyman does. Now, they spotted him. He's come up from the fourth line and then played with Draisaitl and McDavid. And, he still has the skill set and he has scored some key goals. But he just can't play the minutes that Hyman normally plays. More than likely, it's going to fall on Evander Kane. And that's a double-edged sword, because Evander Kane is, while extremely talented, is extremely reckless. He takes stupid penalties. He has very poor impulse control. When he can keep it under control, he's a very valuable player. But we've seen him in the past, just punch players out of nowhere and do just dumb things and take stupid penalties. And Edmonton can't afford that. So now they're lucky, because the reports are that Connor Brown will play in game one, coming back from the concussion after getting hit from, I think it was Alex Petrovic that hit him. So they'll get him back in the lineup, and he's a valuable player. But they're going to need players who are normally in the bottom six to step up and fill the role of Zach Hyman, who's been a very valuable player for the Oilers.
That he has. Quick before we move on from our playoff talk, though, from our Stanley Cup final talk, Mike, I'm curious, just off the top of your head, predictions for this series. How do you think this one's going to go?
I predicted Panthers in 6. I think their physicality, and I've said this all along, I picked against the Oilers in every series, so why should I change now? But the problem is that none of the teams that I thought could beat them have done what I thought they needed to do to beat them, and which is be physical with McDavid and Draisaitl. This team won't hesitate. They will go at those guys. Now they may take penalties, and if Edmonton scores power play goals, then that's going to hurt the Panthers. But Bennett and Tkachuk, if he's capable, and a number of players will be physical with the top guys on the Oilers, and including Kane. And I think they'll probably hope that Kane does something stupid and retaliates. But that's what they'll do. That's what Florida does. They breathe and they hit. That's all they do. So I think that formula will be successful, and I'm expecting Stuart Skinner to become Stuart Skinner again.
Turn back into a pumpkin, maybe. I think that, this series is interesting. I don't know, just like you, I've picked against Edmonton every single series they've been in these playoffs, and clearly that has not been a good strategy. And it's a good thing that I'm not putting money on these picks, because I would have lost a lot by now. So I don't know. I think that I tend to agree with you, though, that I think Florida has what it takes to beat Edmonton. I will say the Oilers' power play does scare me. If I'm Florida, I don't see how you beat that. But if you can keep them, if you're Florida, if you stay out of the box, you can play the game at 5-on-5. I think that's where you win this series. So I will hesitantly pick Florida. Again, probably means Edmonton's going to win just because I said that. But here we are. It's all right. Moving on. Speaking of Florida, though, Alexander Barkov has won the Selke Trophy. Are we surprised at all? He's won the trophy for the second consecutive season, his third in the last 4 seasons. So, of course, he won last year. He also won in 2021. He had 96 first place votes. Sam Reinhart, his teammate, was tied with Anthony Cirelli from Tampa for second with 29 votes. Looking at the Selke Trophy and its history, Patrice Bergeron, of course, has the all-time record for the award. He's won 6 of them. Barkov now has 3 in his last 4 seasons. Do you think that that's a total, that Bergeron total is something that is within reach for Barkov?
I think it's within reach. He's young enough that I think he could win 2 or 3 more at least. I mean, there's a select group of players that, sort of fall into that Selke sphere. I mean, it's Cirelli, as you mentioned, it's Reinhart, Rupe Hintz from Dallas, sometimes Mitch Marner. a few other players, but it's a small group. And Barkov now has the reputation. He's the assumptor of the throne from Patrice Bergeron. He's a center, and he's an extremely good two-way center. And it just seems that with the Selke, you also have to score a little bit to be able to win the trophy. And, he's usually in the top 2 or 3 scorers on the Panthers. So as long as they're a successful team, I think that Barkov is going to be in the mix for the Selke.
And pretty remarkable, too, to have the first and second place finishers both on the same team. Sam Reinhart, of course, really, really dominant in that aspect as well. Now want to move on from the Stanley Cup final teams and take a journey back to last week with the Western Conference final, of course, between the Dallas Stars and the Edmonton Oilers. This is our weekly dose of drama. We love it here on the Wraparound show, don't we, Mike? Looking at Dallas, obviously, there were some comments that were made after they lost Game 5 and were eliminated from the playoffs. Head coach Pete DeBoer had some things to say about specifically Jake Oettinger and the goaltending situation. Oettinger gave up 2 goals on the first 2 shots he faced in Game 5. He was pulled. He was replaced by Casey DeSmith. Of course, DeBoer was asked about it after the game, and I want to read the exact quote for you, Mike, so we can discuss it because there's lots to unpack here. Pete DeBoer said, "I don't blame it all on Jake, but the reality is if you go back to last year's playoffs, he's lost 6 of 7 games to Edmonton, and we gave up 2 goals on 2 shots in an elimination game. It was partly to spark our team and wake them up." He's, of course, now speaking of replacing him with Casey DeSmith, and partly knowing that status quo has not been working and that it's a pretty big sample size. Definitely quite the choice there by Pete DeBoer to publicly throw his goaltender under the bus to the media. Of course, since the comments were made, both Oettinger and DeBoer have come out. They've dismissed any concerns about how this may impact their relationship, to which I say, well, what else are they going to say to the media? But, that's neither here nor there. I think just looking at Pete DeBoer, his time in Dallas, his comments to the media, how this may have shaped his, perspective about him in Dallas. He's got 1 more year on his contract. And then, of course, you look at Oettinger, who is the franchise goaltender for the Dallas Stars. And if these two are at odds in any sort of way, what do you think this means either for Pete DeBoer in Dallas and his future in Dallas, or the Stars and their confidence in Jake Oettinger as their goalie of the present and the future?
Well, in the next episode of As the Stars Turn, Pete DeBoer, I'm not going to blame Jake, but I'm going to blame Jake. I mean, that's what it was. It wasn't throwing him under the bus. It was throwing him under 10 buses. It was ridiculous. And the way that it was handled in the moment was ridiculous, because they showed the replay and Oettinger during the TV timeout is skating back, or not TV timeout, but regular timeout, is skating back to the net. And DeBoer is like, no, you're out. DeSmith is in. That's not the way you treat a number 1 goaltender. Now, I think I was advocating Casey DeSmith starting Game 5 if Oettinger played bad and they fell behind 3-1. But he played well and they fell behind 3-1. So that's why they started him in Game 5. But clearly that was something that was in DeBoer's head. But you don't do it that way. Even though he gave up 2 goals on 2 shots, this is your present and future in goal. And he's got the whip hand here. He's got the 8-year contract. He's not going anywhere. Pete DeBoer, I mean, those suitcases with the different stamps on them. Well, he's got New Jersey, he's got San Jose, he's got Vegas, he's got Dallas. There's going to be a next one probably because he's a good coach, but at certain he runs out of time because he is really tough on his players. So he's got a year left in his contract. I wouldn't be surprised if he got fired. I mean, but it's tough to fire somebody who got to a Western Conference final and has gotten to a Western Conference final 2 years in a row. But yeah, this is not going to be a comfortable situation. And if they go through a losing streak at any point next year, Pete DeBoer's getting canned.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, he gets them to the Western Conference Final, but they can't make it past there. Like you said, they run out of time, they fall apart. And it seems now, again, is it all on coaching? No, but I think that if you look at the way that he's handled this situation and the fact that he is throwing his players under the bus, throwing everyone under the bus except himself, not really taking any ownership, it seems, of where his team has gone wrong, I think that sort of does speak volumes, and it reveals a lot maybe about his history, why he's had so many coaching stops, why he has gotten his teams to the highest level and just failed to get it over the finish line every time. I think that it speaks a lot about his abilities as a leader. And I think that, it now a seat that I wouldn't necessarily say his seat in Dallas is extremely hot right now, but it's getting a little warm, I think, especially after the way that things went down after the Western Conference Final. Moving on to juniors. Let's talk about juniors for a little bit. We had the Memorial Cup final. Easton Cowan and the London Knights, of course, won their third Memorial Cup in franchise history. 4-1 win over the Medicine Hat Tigers, featuring next year's presumptive number one pick, Gavin McKenna. Easton Cowan, we talked about him recently on the show, actually, about how his junior hockey career has just been filled with so many accomplishments. He won the Memorial Cup this year, obviously. He was the MVP of the tournament. He was an OHL champion the last 2 years. He was the 2024 MVP and playoff MVP. 15 points in the Memorial Cup, which ties a franchise record that is currently held by none other than Mitch Marner. And he's got 96 playoff points, which is a franchise record and the second all time in the OHL. Now, his junior career has now officially come to an end. And we've already discussed about whether this could go, whether he could break right into the NHL next season or whether he'll go to the American League. But right now, just reflecting on his junior career with the London Knights, obviously some, very well-known players have gone through that system. Where do you think Cowan will go down among the best all-time London Knights players?
Well, he's going to be up there. I think what he does in the NHL will affect, like his reputation going forward, obviously. But I mean, you put him up there. I think I heard when they were presenting him with the trophy last night, it was only Marner and Corey Perry who had won that for the Knights. So, I mean, this is a long and a very prominently historic franchise with a number of great players, Patrick Kane, Matthew Tkachuk, going back to previous generations with Brendan Shanahan and Darryl Sittler. I mean, so, the very, very storied franchise. His statistics in junior are impeccable. They're remarkable. It's just ironic that he is going to go in next year winning all these awards, and the guy that he potentially could replace, although people I've talked to said, he probably needs a little time in the American Hockey League, a little time acclimating to the pro game. But everything that he did followed what Mitch Marner did, and all the awards, winning the Memorial Cup, everything that he did, Mitch Marner did. So, in the powder keg that is, and the media wise, that is Toronto, to have him come into training camp with Marner likely leaving it's going to be an interesting story that I'm sure we're going to be talking about on the wraparound in September and October. But his junior accomplishments are remarkable. They're just incredible. And I think he did everything that he possibly could as a junior. The only thing that I think he didn't accomplish was not under his control, really, was winning a World Junior. He played in two of them, and Canada didn't win in either one. But, nothing that Easton Cowan left it all out there. He did a remarkable job.
Absolutely. Will be he has been a special player and a special one to follow here going forward. Speaking of the Maple Leafs, we'll stay on them for a second. Um, Looking at the off-season conversation for the Leafs, of course, a lot of the chatter is going to be around Mitch Marner, of course, and then John Tavares. But if the team is considering looking at more changes, more significant changes moving forward, what are the chances that they approach a guy like Morgan Rielly about his interest in a trade? I mean, he's got a no move clause. He's carrying a 7.5 million AAV for the next 4 seasons. Again, this is sort of circumstantial here, depending on what the Leafs decide to do moving forward. But what are your thoughts on maybe approaching him about a trade?
The chances are absolute zero. Apparently, Pierre LeBrun spoke to either his agent or the horse's mouth himself, and Rielly is not waiving the no movement clause. He wants to stay in Toronto. He's got a young family. He's played his entire career since being drafted there in 2012. He wants to win there. I don't think he wants to leave sort of with a bad taste in his mouth, in the sense that, he's never been able to have any kind of postseason glory there. I don't think that's on him. I mean, he didn't have a particularly good year, and that's why all the talk has been about him getting moved. But he played really well once they got Brandon Carlo, and that pairing played together. So I think this is more just the chatter of the disenchanted fan base in Toronto looking to, it can't just be Mitch Marner. It's got to be somebody else. Well, John Tavares is probably coming back on a deal cheaper than his $11 million, and Morgan Rielly isn't going anywhere, and neither is Matthews or Nylander. So you're going to have to spend the money that you had freed up by Marner and maybe half of Tavares and fill in the holes there, and that's probably what they're going to do.
Well, you mentioned Tavares probably taking a team-friendly deal to stay on with Toronto. Might have gotten a blueprint for that already from the Tampa Bay Lightning. They extended Yanni Gourde to a 6-year contract worth $2.33 million AAV. Gourde, of course, was traded from Seattle back to Tampa Bay as part of a 3-team trade, also involved the Detroit Red Wings. This was all back in March. What are your thoughts on this move? I mean, 6 years for Yanni Gourde, again, very team friendly on the cap hit. Do you think this is a good long-term bet for the Lightning?
Yeah, this is a player who I don't think ever wanted to leave Tampa. It's a situation where they traded for him at the deadline. They gave up a lot of assets to get him and Oliver Bjorkstrand. He only had a goal in 21 games, but clearly they know the player. They know what his makeup is. And I think he wanted to stay there. Now, I haven't seen the details on the deal, so I don't know whether there's any no move protection. But he's 33 years old. He's not going to play 6 years. He's probably going to play 2 or 3. I'm sure the deal is front loaded. It's, good for him, and it's good for Tampa Bay. And as you said before we recorded, this is the contract that Steven Stamkos didn't want to take in Tampa. But Steven Stamkos and Yanni Gourde are 2 different players. One is a superstar, and one is just a good player.
Yeah, I think that offering the same contract to Steven Stamkos, a little bit disrespectful, but I think that a guy like Yanni Gourde is the exact kind of guy that you offer that contract to. So I think relatively low risk for Tampa Bay moving forward on that. All right, here's a fun topic. The Amazon documentary series, FACEOFF Inside the NHL, hugely popular last season when it debuted. They are going to be coming back for a second season, and Amazon announced the 14 individuals who will be the focus of season 2. Obviously, got some players, got some executives in there. Huge list of guys here. Just very quickly: Sidney Crosby, Marc-Andre Fleury, Anze Kopitar, Matthew Tkachuk, Brendan Shanahan, Mikko Rantanen, William Nylander, Thomas Harley, Quentin Byfield, Wyatt Johnston, Seth Jarvis, Sean Monahan, Brady Tkachuk, and Zach Werenski. So lengthy list there. Mike, anyone stick out to you from that list as one that you're especially excited to see?
Well, Shanahan, obviously, from my focus on Toronto, is extremely interesting, and what has evolved. And I mean, we don't know where he's going to end up next year, if at all. Maybe he ends up back at the NHL. Maybe he ends up on TV. Who knows? But I'm sure everything will, that will be an interesting subject to follow and to learn more about. William Nylander, unless you're interested in about hair care, because he's got great locks. But I think the one, honestly, is Sean Monahan. I mean, obviously, the role that he took in Columbus after the death of one of his best friends, Yanni Gourde, and the year that he had, and the importance to him, to that Blue Jackets team in the wake of that tragedy. I think that's going to be something that I would tune in for.
Yeah, definitely a lot of good storylines here. Of course, Mikko Rantanen's got to be an interesting one too, after the year that he's had and moving all around the league. Personally, maybe just a nostalgia thing for me. Anything with Marc-Andre Fleury at the center of it, I am all in. I mean, that guy is just walking entertainment, especially with this being his final season in the NHL. I think it'll be great. All right, moving on, something that you can shed a little bit of light on for us, Mike. The Buffalo Sabres, they've hired former Blue Jackets GM Jarmo Kekalainen to serve as a senior advisor to Kevyn Adams. This is a newly created role. He'll be involved in all areas of the hockey department. So Kekalainen, just to review here, fired as GM of the Blue Jackets in February of last year. He was there for 11 seasons. Of course, he's replaced by Don Waddell, who came from Carolina. What value do you think that he brings to the Sabres franchise? And what, if anything, do you really expect from him in this role? Do you think that we'll see any kind of, significant impact from him?
Well, I mean, experience, obviously. If you look at his resume, scout, a director of amateur scouting, assistant GM for over a decade. I also think the fact that he was GM in a city where it's tough to get players to sign there, and that's obviously the reputation in Buffalo. Buffalo used to be a destination market, but after 14 years of not making the playoffs, it's not. And that's just the reality. Now, I think that the focus is going to be, because they can't get players to sign here, or they need to overpay to get players to come here, that the focus on possibly making trades and having Kekalainen, who knows the league well, will be an advantage. I also think that if they fail this year, that Kekalainen could be the heir apparent in terms of the next GM, because he'll be on the scene and he's got experience. But I mean, I think it's a good hire. And this team right now, they need to make bold moves this summer if they think they have a chance to make the playoffs in the Eastern Conference.
Definitely do. All right, want to wrap up today's discussion talking about Ivan Demidov, the Canadiens rookie. He was awarded the Rookie of the Year award in the KHL over in Russia, despite the fact that he left to join the Montreal Canadiens for the final few games of the regular season, and then, of course, the playoffs as well. For SKA St. Petersburg, Demidov had 49 points, 19 goals, 30 assists in 65 games, led his team in scoring. Considering he is still now, as a rookie, eligible to win the Calder Trophy with the Canadiens next season, he'll have a full summer now of NHL training under his belt. He's got playoff experience now under his belt in the NHL. Looking ahead to next season, is he just far and away the front runner for the Calder Trophy, you think?
I think he's one of them. Obviously, the experience at the end of the year, the start that he had, and the playoff look that he got is going to help him. I think he's got about as good a chance of winning the Calder as Matvei Michkov had in Philadelphia. I think obviously, I think that Montreal is ahead of Philadelphia in terms of their rebuild. They were a playoff team, and Philadelphia probably isn't going to be one. But the challenges of adjusting to the KHL, from the KHL to the NHL, he's not a fully formed player. He's an offensive phenom. Defensively, strength-wise, I think are things that he's going to have to work on and improve. Maybe he can get stronger during the offseason. He'll be in the running. He'll be on that short list, but I'm sure there are probably 3 or 4 other players that I can't think of right now in the moment that will be have just as good a chance of winning the Calder as Demidov.
Definitely will be an interesting race to be sure. That is going to do it for our conversation today on the Wraparound, brought to you by Sticks.com. Thank you, of course, Mike, for joining me today, talking all things hockey, whether it's junior hockey, playoffs, contracts, coach versus player drama, everything in between. We've got it all here on the Wraparound. So love talking some hockey with you today. Thanks again to Sticks.com for sponsoring us. Once again, I'm Emma Lingen. He's Mike Agello. This is the Wraparound, and we will see you next week.